Welcome back to another Skid Factory Quick Tech. I spent the last week working on a manifolding system for a turbo on a Subaru H6 engine, and that involved a lot of welding, obviously. I've been doing a lot of purge welding on it because it's a high pressure, high heat environment, and it always comes up in our comment section, why did or didn't you purge weld this, that sort of thing, a lot of comments about it. So I thought, let's have a bit of a look at purge welding and explain what's going on. Since we started this show, I've often skirted around welding because it is a pretty volatile environment to get into when it comes to internet users. Everyone seems to have a very, very strong opinion of who's doing the right thing and who isn't. So normally we just don't bother talking about it because it's a waste of everyone's time. But I'm going to present you with my experience. That's all I can do. I'm not a welder. I've just trained myself to how to weld, and I have standards of how things need to be done in an automotive environment. I don't make milk vats. I don't make baked bean factories. This is not food service. There's no need to do a lot of the things that you do in food service industries because we're not dealing with bacteria or anything like that. This is just a car exhaust system or an intercooler pipe. It's the lowest of the low when it comes to welding requirements for that sort of material. So we're not going to do things that don't need to be done because that just costs people money. Purge welding is not necessarily needed in a lot of cases. Some cases it is, and in that case we will use that technique. So purge welding, basically, a little bit of a rundown about this TIG torch, I suppose. I sort of have to assume that people know a little bit about the process of TIG welding. TIG welding requires shielding gas, which is usually argon or argon mix if you're getting into really fancy stuff. So the argon comes out of this nozzle and shields the tungsten electrode from oxygen in the air. So if you get oxygen into the kernel, like the puddle, the hot bit, it will basically combust and ruin your weld. So you've got an argon shield that purges out the oxygen in a little tiny tube around the welding environment. That's a very small nozzle that they can get up to this big. There's all sorts of things. A lot of people are using new types of nozzles that give better weld finishes and use less gas. I'm not going to go into that either. But basically what we're doing when we're purging is actually filling the inside of the job with argon as well. So the little shield on the outside does the job. But when we penetrate the metal, it's molten on the inside as well as the outside in many cases, especially with thin walls material like this. So what happens, particularly with stainless steel, where you're most likely to be using purging, it's the most common material that does require it, is when the weld penetrates into the stainless steel, it then reacts with the oxygen on the inside of the pipe. So to be able to prevent that, we actually have to fill the entire pipe with argon, which is obviously quite expensive. Argon is not a cheap material in Australia. It may be in other countries, but here it's not. That's why we don't do it unless we need to, because I've probably used $300 worth of gas in making this manifolding system. That's a lot of money to put on top of what's already a very expensive job. I did it this time because it is required because of the environment that it's in, but in other things like the back half of the exhaust system, I wouldn't do it because it's not needed and it just costs too much money. So my little jerry-rigged system I have for purge welding is basically just, I have a second bottle with a second regulator on it. There is regulator systems that will have a dual outlet on them. So one is your torch and one is your purge. That's a common way of doing it. If you're in a big workshop that just does welding, you would probably have that. They're quite expensive, and it's easier for me to just have a second bottle, and that's what I do. I have a small bottle that I usually only use for purging and emergencies when I run out of my big bottle, so I don't have to stress out about having to go and get another bottle. So I got that set up. It's just got a hose on it with a ball valve. That's where the argon comes out. So that gas flow is regulated the same way that you regulate this with the unit on the bottle. You can play around with how much argon flow you need. Generally it's higher than what the torch is because it's got to fill a bigger volume. Again, using more. I just try and find the right match for it so I don't use more than I need to. All these little things here are little adapters that I've just made. You just got to make things to work. That's to shove into a 1 3/4 pipe. Hose then goes on there. These ones are for V-bands. So quite often I'm only doing this on stuff that's pretty high end. So it usually has V-band turbos on them and V-band connections because it's that sort of job. So these are great. You can see here that I've got one. I'm just using the actual V-band clamp to clamp that piece of aluminium to it. That's a sufficient seal. It allows you to get right in close and weld the actual V-band on without things getting in the way. Like this. This is normally what I use on the end where it doesn't matter, where it's not near anything. It's just what we call alfoil in Australia. It's aluminium foil that you use in cooking and stuff like that. Obviously, it's not going to get damaged by the heat. My method of holding it on there is just to use masking tape, and I just have sometimes it does catch on fire, but it doesn't affect anything. So in this case, the gas would go in here, and it'll want to come out here. So you've got to put a couple of little prick holes in there to purge the oxygen or the air out of it. So that might take a few minutes. You've got to leave it for a few minutes, just the gas flow running until you think that you've probably got it all out, and then you can continue on with the job. You have to keep it running the whole time because it will eventually if you don't have that pressure of the argon flowing through, the oxygen will return into the pipe and you'll have difficulties. So that one's all been purged. Quite often I don't even do the dump pipes, but because this one's got wastegate returns and stuff like that, where you get problems with sugaring, which is what happens inside the pipe if the oxygen gets to the puddle, these are the points where you're most likely going to get that to happen because you've got to use a lot of filler wire and that sort of thing. So I've chosen to purge that pipe as well. I haven't actually finished doing that one yet. That's the next job on the list. So if you want to have a quick look at this, this is actually the piece of metal that I've hole sawed out of this dump pipe to allow that pipe to fit in there for the return. That's the outside, what you normally see. On the inside, it basically looks very similar. So the penetration that's coming through is shielded as well. So it actually gives you a similar sort of weld pattern. It normally, like you don't see the stacked coins or whatever people fantasize about on the internet about welding. You just see the fuse from the heat and it gives a nice finish, and that protects the weld joint. And it's particularly important in food service industries and things like that because any of those little things there in a baked bean factory that have food in them, that's a spot where bacteria can live. So that's why it's so, people talk about purge welding stainless steel all the time, is because it's not for automotive stuff, it's for things like dairies, food service, canneries, that sort of thing. So yes, it's welding, yes, it's stainless steel, but no, it's not the same industry and not the same requirement. So I figured the best way to show what's happening here is to actually just use the 3 ways that you can use to weld these 2 bits of stainless together. We've got purge welding with filler, just filler with no purge on the inside, and fused with no purge. So that's using no filler wire. It's a very effective way of making an exhaust system. It just requires you to be very careful with your fitment. So a lot of the time is actually in the fabrication, piecing it all together, rather than the welding process itself. So I'll fire up the welder. I'll do the couple of unpurged welds first. Then we'll jerry rig up a purge. I'll do that 3rd purged weld, and then we'll cut it off and have a look, and you'll be able to see the differences.
Did you get some new gloves?
Yeah. They're not that easy to find around here. Everyone seems to have gloves for welding together bridges, but not for TIG welding. All right, we'll start off with fused. So no filler, just torch. That's just fused. Carefully, you don't need much current for that. Biggest mistake people make when they're TIG welding is overheating the job. And actually, one of the advantages of purge welding is that it is much more difficult to overheat the job, which is where you get problems with metal quality and that sort of thing. So we're just going to fill it now. And filling instantly creates problems because it requires more heat than just fusing, and that's where you're going to get issues with sugaring on the inside. So I can do it so it doesn't cause a problem, but I'm actually going to do it so it does cause a problem, so we can actually see what happens when you put too much current into it, which is what a lot of people do when they're welding.
Why do you always hold the torch there in front of the weld?
So it's kind of called, it's called gas afterflow. So the tungsten, whilst ever it's red, it should have gas flowing over the top of it because it will also get attacked by oxygen in the air. And I hold it also over the top of the end of the weld run, because it's also still red and will get attacked by oxygen. So you just leave it there until the gas afterflows run out. You can go up to like minutes on gas afterflow. I don't see the need for it in what I do with this sort of thing, but in other types of welding, it's obviously required. But like I said, I'm not a professional welder and I'm not welding up things that are that important. This isn't a gas pipeline. Well, it kind of is because it's moving gas, but it's not filled with highly volatile gases that if they escape can blow half a city up. So different things require different techniques. Oh, it's an awful noise. All right, I successfully managed to make a really shitty weld out of that, which is what I was trying to do. The funny thing is it actually looks reasonable on the outside, unless you're an internet commenter, and it's obviously rubbish. So now we've got to hook up our purge setup. I'm just going to jerry rig it together with some stuff. This is the cold end, so I'm just going to tape it straight on. Like I said, you've got to be creative with this stuff. There is actual products you can buy that taper their way into the pipes and that sort of thing, but I don't do this enough to justify buying stuff like that. I just make it work. So you can see I've let the argon through from the second bottle. It's obviously coming through all right because it's blowing up the dodgy alfoil. Just stick your ear up to it and listen and feel it as well. Depends on how big that vessel is, how long you purge it for before you start welding. It has to remain on the whole time that you are welding as well. But this isn't too big, so I'll probably give it 30 seconds or as long as it takes for me to talk crap and then start on it. There's our filled purged weld. Doesn't look much difference from the not purged weld on the outside, but it's the inside that we're interested in. So let's chop it up and have a look. All right, time for the money shot. This will show you the clear difference between purge welding and not purge welding, and also introducing filler into a weld versus just fusing it together. So first of all, we've got fused, which it's pretty reasonable. There's not much sugaring. The sugaring is the sort of grey bits you can sort of see peeking through. It's not too bad. I did try and increase the temperature to make it sugar at the end here. It's pretty reasonable. It's perfectly acceptable for the exhaust system post-turbo. Next, let's have a look at filled. You can see some serious sugaring going on there. That's basically overheating the weld, and it's going through, and that's filler wire coming through and then getting attacked by oxygen, which causes that sort of grey, sort of broccoli looking colour, looking sort of texture with a bit of burn around it. So that's not great. Here's purged. You can see how much of a difference it makes. It looks like a nice clean internal weld. Again, I've increased the temperature to show what happens when you put more current into it and overheat, or get the metal hotter. You can see all it does is just create a wider internal weld with more heat. And that's why it is a really good thing to purge. However, it's not necessarily all the time, and you are spending money and you're spending time doing it. So I use it where necessary, but otherwise not. I can weld a whole exhaust system with the fuse technique. You don't overheat it. It gives a beautiful weld. You can see how it's just a nice clean fuse. You can see how even that's the purged weld. The discoloration is much higher because you're still putting more temperature into the material. And yeah, it's not a great deal of difference with that filled weld, except where it starts really penetrating and sinking like that. I guess from my point of view, purging is kind of cheating, because if you don't know how to weld without cooking the material, purging is, it's going to mask it a bit, but it's not going to fix the problem. You really need to learn current control to not cook the material in the first place. You should be able to join it without cooking it. And the biggest thing for that is make sure you fabricate it properly first. You can't leave gaps. It's not a MIG welder. If you leave a big fat gap in it because you couldn't be bothered spending another 10 minutes getting those two joins correct, you're going to have a bad time. Even purge welding is not going to fix that problem. You need to do it properly in the first place. Even when I'm MIG welding an exhaust, everything still has to fit properly. Filling in gaps with welding rod or wire is absolutely not on. So do the right thing. Another question we often get is, why didn't you purge weld that intercooler or those aluminium pipes? The answer to that is you don't need to. That's all there is to it. It's not the same type of material as this. Mild steel, the same. You just don't need to do it, so it's not the done thing. It's a waste of money. It works perfectly fine just welding it in the normal manner. Titanium, pretty uncommon to use titanium. It's not really necessarily in most like normal applications. Yes, you do need to purge weld titanium. It can be welded without purging it, but it will work better and overheat it less if you do purge it. So if you're going to the trouble of buying titanium and making an exhaust system out of titanium, you're probably not going to worry too much about spending a bit on purging gas and doing it that way. That's probably about all we got today. Again, if you've got questions, ask. We'll see if we can do a little quick tech on them. Although our quick techs seem to not be very quick. But whatever. I just blurt out what's in my head. Hopefully it makes sense. Thanks for watching.